Hey there, everybody. It's been a bit of a day. So, I guess we have two self-care evenings in a row. So, Chapter 6, which concerns the color blue. Charmaine sighed and stuffed the king's letter into her pocket. She did not feel like sharing whatever said with Peter. Why, she said, why are they angry? Well, come and see, Peter said. It all sounds ridiculous to me. I told them that you were in charge and that they had to wait until you had finished being polite to those witches. Witches? Said Charmaine. One of them was my mother. My mother's a witch, Peter said. And you only had to look at the proud one in silk to see that she was a witch. Oh, do come in. He held the door open for Charmaine, and she went through, thinking that Peter was probably right about Aunt Sempronia. No one in the baker's respectable house ever mentioned witchcraft, but Charmaine had thought that Aunt Sempronia was a witch for years without ever putting it to herself so baldly. She forgot about Aunt Sempronia as soon as she entered the kitchen. There were kobolds everywhere. Little blue men with different shapes of large blue noses were standing anywhere there was a space on the floor that was not full of dog dishes or spilled tea. They were on the table between the teapots, and in the sink balanced on dirty dishes. They were little blue women, too, mostly perched on the laundry bags. The women were distinguished by their smaller, gentler noses and their rather stylish, flounced blue skirts. I'd like a skirt like that, Charmaine thought. Only larger, of course. There were so many kobolds that it took Charmaine a moment to notice that the bubbles from the fireplace were nearly gone. All of the kobolds raised a shrill shout as Charmaine came in. We seem to have gotten the whole tribe, Peter said. Charmaine thought that he was probably right. Well, very well, she said above the yelling. I'm here. What's the problem? The answer was such a storm of yelling that Charmaine put her hands over her ears. That'll do. How can I understand a word that you say when you all scream at once? She recognized the kobold who had appeared in the living room, standing on a chair with at least 6 others. His nose was a very memorable shape. You tell me, what was your name again? He gave her a curt little bow. Timmins is my name. I understand that you are Charming Baker, and you speak for the wizard. Am I right? More or less, Charmaine said. There did not seem to be much point in arguing about her name. Besides, she rather liked being called Charming. I told you the wizard's ill. He's gone away to get cured. Well, so you say, Timmins answered. Are you sure he hasn't run away? This produced such yells and jeers from all over the kitchen that Charmaine had to shout again to be heard. Oh, be quiet. Of course he hasn't run away. I was here when he went. He was very unwell, and the elves had to carry him. He would have died if the elves hadn't taken him. In the near silence that followed this, Timmins said sulkily, If you say so, we believe you, of course. Our quarrel is with the wizard, but maybe you can settle it. And I tell you that you won't like and I tell you that we don't like it. It's indecent. What is? Charmaine asked. Timmins squeezed his eyes up and glowered over his nose. You're not to laugh. The wizard laughed when I complained to him. I promise not to laugh, Charmaine said. So what is it? We were very angry, Timmins said. Our ladies refused to wash his dishes for him, and we took away his taps so that he couldn't wash them himself. But all he did was smile and say that he didn't have the strength to argue. Well, he was ill, Charmaine said. You know that now, so what was it about? Well, this garden of his, Timmins said. The complaint came first from Rollo, but I came and took a look, and Rollo was quite right. The wizard was growing bushes with blue flowers, which is correct and reasonable color for flowers to be. But by his magic he had made half the same bushes pink, and some of them were green or white, which was disgusting and incorrect. Here Peter was unable to contain himself. But hydrangeas are like that, he burst out. I've explained it to you. Any gardener could tell you. If you don't put the bluing powder under the whole bush, some of the flowers are going to be pink. Rollo's a gardener. He must have known. Charmaine looked around the crowded kitchen, but could not see Rollo anywhere among the swarms of blue people. Well, he probably only told you, she said, because he likes to chop things down. I bet he kept asking the wizard if he could chop the bushes down, and the wizard said no. He asked me last night. At this, Rollo popped out from beside a dog dish around almost at Charmaine's feet. She recognized him mostly by his grating little voice when he shouted, And so I did ask her, and she sits there in the path, having just floated down from the sky, cool as you please, and tells me I only want to enjoy myself, as bad as the wizard she is. Charmaine glared down at him. You are just a destructive little beast, she said. What you're doing is making trouble because you can't get your own way. Rollo flung out an arm. Hear her! Hear her! Hear that? Who's wrong here? Her or me? Come and see the violence inherent in the system! Help! Help! I'm being repressed! A dreadful, shrill clamor rose from all over the kitchen. Timmins shouted for silence. When the clamor had died down into muttering, he said to Charmaine, So will you now give me permission for these disgraceful bushes to be lopped down? No, I will not, Charmaine told him. They're Great Uncle William's bushes, and I'm supposed to look after all of his things for him, and Rollo is just making trouble. Timmins said, squeezing his glower at her, Is that your last word? Yes, it is. Then, Timmins said, You're on your own. No kobold is going to do a hand's turn for you from now on. And then they were all gone. Just like that, the blue crowd vanished from among the teapots and dog dishes and dirty crockery, leaving a little wind stirring the last few bubbles about, and the fire now burning brightly in the grate. Well, that was stupid of you, Peter said. What do you mean? Charmaine asked indignantly. You're the one who said those bushes were supposed to be like that, and you could see that Royal had got them all stirred up on purpose. I couldn't let Great Uncle William come home to find his garden all chopped down, now could I? Yes, but you could have been more tactful. I was expecting you to say that we'd put down a bluing spell to make all the flowers blue or something. Well, yes, but Rollo would still have wanted to cut them all down. He told me I was a spoil sport last night for not letting him. Well, you could have made them see what he was like, instead of making them all even angrier. At least I didn't laugh at them like Great Uncle William did. He made them angry, not me. And look where that got him, Peter said. They took away all his taps and left all of his dishes dirty, so now we've got to wash them all without even any hot water in the bathroom. Charmaine flounced down into the chair and began again to open the king's letter. Why have we got to, she said. I haven't the remotest idea how to wash dishes anyway. Peter was scandalized. You haven't? Why ever not? Charmaine got the envelope open and pulled open a beautiful, large, stiff, folded paper. Well, my mother brought me up to be respectable, she said. She never let me near the scullery or the kitchen either. I don't believe this, Peter said. Why is it respectable not to know how to do things? Is it respectable to light a fire with a bar of soap? That, Charmaine said haughtily, was an accident. Please be quiet and let me read my letter. She pulled her glasses up to the top of her nose and unfolded the stiff paper. Dear Mistress Baker, she read. Well, I'm going to get on and try, Peter said. I'll be blowed if I'm going to get bullied by a crowd of little blue people, and I should think you had enough pride to help me do it. Shut up, said Charmaine, and concentrated on her letter. Dear Mistress Baker, how kind of you to offer us your services. In the normal way, we would find the assistance of our daughter, the Princess Hilda, to be sufficient to our need, but it so happens that the princess is about to receive important visitors, and is obliged to forego her work in the library for the duration of the visit. We, therefore, gratefully accept your kind offer on a temporary basis. If you would be so good as to present yourself at the Royal Mansion this coming Wednesday morning at around 10:30, we shall be happy to receive you in our library and instruct you in our work. Your obliged and grateful, Adolphus Rex, Norlandi Alti. Charmaine's heart banged and bumped as she read the letter, and it was not until she reached the end of it that she realized that the amazing, unlikely, unbelievable thing had happened. The king had agreed to let her help him in the royal library. Tears came to her eyes. She was not sure why, and she had to whisk her glasses off. Her heart hammered with joy, then with alarm. Was today Wednesday? Had she missed her chance? She had been hearing without attending Peter crashing saucepans about and kicking dog dishes aside as he went to the inner door. Now she heard him come back again. What day is today? She asked him. Peter set the large saucepan he was carrying down, hissing on the fire. Well, I'll tell you if you tell me where he keeps his soap, he said. Oh, bother you, said Charmaine. It's in the pantry. It's in a bag labeled something like conitis. Now, what day is it? Cloths. Tell me where the cloths are first. Do you know where there are 2 new bags of laundry in his pantry? Or did you know that there are 2 new bags of laundry in his pantry now? I don't know where the cloths are, Charmaine said. What day is it? Cloths first, said Peter. He doesn't answer when I ask. Well, he didn't know you were coming, Charmaine said. Is it Wednesday yet? Well, I can't think of why he didn't know, Peter said. He got my letter. Asks for cloths. Charmaine sighed. Great Uncle William, this stupid boy wants to know where the cloths are. Please. The kindly voice replied, Do you know, my dear, I nearly forgot the cloths. They're in the table drawer. It's Tuesday, Peter said, pouncing on the drawer and dragging it open almost into Charmaine's stomach. He said as he fetched out wads of toweling and dishcloths. I know it must be Tuesday because I set off from home on Saturday and it took me 3 days to walk here. Are you satisfied? Thank you. It's very kind of you. Then I'm afraid I'll have to go into town tomorrow. I may be gone all day. Well, then isn't it lucky that I'm here to look after the place for you, Peter said. Where you're skiving off to, or skiving off to. Which, for the record, is British slang for slacking. The king, Charmaine said, with great dignity, he asked me to go and help him. Read this if you don't believe me. Peter picked up the letter and looked it over. I see. You have arranged to be in 2 places at once. Nice for you. So you can darned well help me wash these dishes now when the water's hot. Why, I didn't get them dirty, Charmaine said. She pocketed her letter and stood up. I'm going out into the garden. Well, I didn't get them dirty either, Peter said, and it was your uncle who annoyed the kobolds. Charmaine simply swept past him towards the living room. You've got nothing to do with being respectable, Peter shouted after her. You're just lazy. Charmaine took no notice and swept onwards to the front door. Waif followed her, bustling appealingly around her ankles, but Charmaine was too annoyed with Peter to bother with Waif. Always criticizing, she said. He's never stopped once since he got here, as if he was perfect, she said as she flung open the door. She gasped. The kobolds had been busy, very, very busy, very, very quickly. True, they had not cut down the bushes because she had told them not to, but they had cut off every single pink blossom and most of the mauve or white ones. The front path was strewn with pink and lilac umbrellas of hydrangea flowers that she could see more laying around among the bushes. Charmaine gave a cry of outrage and then rushed forwards to pick them up. Lazy am I, she muttered as she collected hydrangea heads into her skirt. Oh, poor great Uncle William, what a mess. He liked them all colors. Oh, those little blue beasts. She went to tip the flowers out of her skirt onto the table outside the study window and discovered a basket by the wall there. She took it with her among the bushes. While Waif scuttled and snorted and sniffed around her, Charmaine snipped hydrangea heads by the basket load. She chuckled rather meanly when she discovered that the kobolds had not always been certain which were blue. They had left most of the ones that were greenish and some of the ones that were lavender colored, while there was one bush at which they must have had a real trouble because each flower on each of its umbrellas was pink in the middle and blue on the outside. To judge by the numbers of tiny footprints around the bush, they had held a meeting about it. In the end, they had cut off the blooms of 1/2 of the bush and left the rest. See, it's not that easy, Charmaine said loudly, in case there were any kobolds around listening. And what it really is vandalism, and I hope you're ashamed. She carried her last basketful back to the table, repeating, Vandals, bad behavior, little beasts, and hoping that Rollo at least was somewhere listening. Some of the biggest heads had quite long stalks. Charmaine collected those into a large pink, mauve, and greenish-white bunch, and spread the rest out on the table to dry in the sun. She remembered reading somewhere that you could dry hydrangeas, and they would stay the same color and make good decorations for winter. Great Uncle William would enjoy these, she thought. So you see, it is useful to sit and read a lot, she announced to the air. By this time, however, she knew that she was trying to justify herself to the world, if not to Peter, because she had been rather too impressed with herself for getting a letter from the king. Oh well. Come on, Waif. Waif followed Charmaine into the house, but backed away from the kitchen door, trembling. Charmaine saw why when she came into the kitchen, and Peter looked up from his steaming saucepan. He had found an apron from somewhere and stacked all of the crockery into neat heaps along the floor. He gave Charmaine a look of righteous pain. Very ladylike, he said. I ask you to help me wash up, and you pick flowers. No, really, Charmaine said. Those beastly kobolds have cut off all the pink ones. They have? Oh, that's too bad. Your uncle's going to be upset when he comes home, isn't he? You could put your flowers in that dish where the eggs are. Charmaine looked at a pie dish full of eggs, crammed in beside the big bag of soap flakes among the teapots on the table. Then where do we put the eggs? Just a moment. She went away to the bathroom and put the hydrangeas in the wash basin. It was rather ominously moist and trickly in there, but Charmaine preferred not to think about that. She went back to the kitchen and said, "Now I'm going to nurture the hydrangea bushes by emptying these teapots on them." "Well, nice try. That'll take you several hours. Do you think this water is hot yet?" "Well, it's only steaming," Charmaine said. "I think it ought to bubble. And it won't take me hours. Watch." She sorted out 2 largest saucepans and began emptying teapots into them. She was saying, "There are some advantages to being lazy, you know." When she realized that, as soon as she had emptied a teapot and put it back on the table, the teapot disappeared. "Well, leave us one," Peter said anxiously. "I'd like a hot drink." Charmaine thought about this and carefully put the last teapot down on the chair. It disappeared too. "Oh well," Peter said. Since he was obviously trying not to be so unfriendly, Charmaine said, "Well, we can have afternoon tea in the living room after I've emptied these, and my mother brought along another bag of food when she came." Peter cheered up remarkably. "Well, then we can have a decent meal when we're done washing up. We're doing that first, whatever you say." And he held Charmaine to it, in spite of her protests. As soon as she came in from the garden, Peter came and took the book out of her hands and presented her with a cloth to tie around her waist instead. Then he led her to the kitchen, where the mysterious and horrible process began. Peter thrust another cloth into her hands. "You wipe, I'll wash," he said, lifting the steaming saucepan off the fire and pouring half the hot water into the soap flakes sprinkled in the sink. He heaved up a bucket of cold water from the pump and poured half of that into the sink too. "Well, why are you doing that?" Charmaine asked. "So as not to get scalded," Peter replied, plunging knives and forks into this mixture and following those with a stack of plates. "Don't you know anything?" "No," Charmaine said. She thought irritably that not one of the many books she had read had so much as mentioned washing dishes, let alone explained how you did it. She watched as Peter briskly used a dishcloth to wipe old dinner off of a patterned plate. The plate came out of the suds bright and clean. Charmaine rather liked the pattern now, and was almost inclined to believe that this was magic. She watched Peter dip the plate in another bucket to rinse it. Then he handed it to her. "Well, what do I do with this?" she asked. "Wipe it dry, of course. Then stack it on the table." Charmaine tried. The whole horrible business took ages. The wiping cloth hardly seemed to soak up water at all, and the plate kept nearly slithering out of her hands. She was so much slower at wiping than Peter was at washing that Peter soon had a heap of plates draining beside the sink and began to get impatient. Naturally, at that point, the prettiest patterned plate slid out of Charmaine's hands completely and fell onto the floor. Unlike the strange teapots, it broke. "Oh," Charmaine said, staring down at the pieces. "How do you put them back together?" Peter rolled his eyes up towards the ceiling. "You don't. You just take care not to drop another." "I'll wash, I'll dry, I'll break." He collected the pieces of plate and threw them into another bucket. "I'll wipe now. You try your hands at washing, or we'll be all day." He let the now brownish water out of the sink, collected the knives, forks, and spoons out of it, and dropped them in the rinsing bucket. To Charmaine's surprise, they all seemed to be clean and shiny now. As she watched Peter fill the sink again with more soap and hot water, she decided crossly but quite reasonably that Peter had chosen the easy part of the work. But she found that she was mistaken. Because, in truth, washing dishes is the least fun chore. Oh, best beloved. Which is also why doing the dishes is a symbol of love. She found that she was mistaken. She did not find it easy at all. It took her slow ages on each piece of crockery, and she got soaked down the front of her in the process. And Peter kept handing back plates and cups, saucers and mugs, saying that they were still dirty. Nor would he let her wash any of the many dog dishes until the human crockery was done. Charmaine thought this was too bad of him. Waif had licked each one so clean that Charmaine knew that they would be easier to wash than anything else. Then on top of this, she was horrified to find that her hands were coming out of the suds all red and covered with strange wrinkles. "I must be ill. I've got a horrible skin disease." She was annoyed and offended when Peter laughed at her. But the dreadful business was done at last. Charmaine, damp in the front and wrinkly in the hands, went sulkily off to the living room to read the 12-branched wand by the slanting light of the setting sun, leaving Peter to stack the clean things in the pantry. By this time, she was feeling she might go mad if she didn't sit and read for a while. I've hardly read a word all day, she thought. Peter interrupted her much too soon by coming in with a vase that he had found and filled with the hydrangeas, which he dumped down on the table in front of her. "Where's that food you said your mother brought?" "What?" Charmaine said, peering at him through the foliage. "I said food." Waif seconded him by leaning against Charmaine's legs and moaning. "That's not whining. This is whining." "Oh," Charmaine said. "Yes. Food. You can have some if you promise not to dirty a single dish eating it." "Oh, that's all right," Peter said. I'm so hungry I could lick it off the carpet." So Charmaine reluctantly stopped reading and dragged the bag of food out from behind the armchair, and they all three ate large numbers of Mr. Baker's beautiful pasties, followed by afternoon tea twice from the trolley. In the course of this huge meal, Charmaine parked the vase of hydrangeas on the trolley to be out of the way. When she next looked, they had vanished. "I wonder where they went," Peter said. "Well, you can sit on the trolley and find out," Charmaine suggested, but Peter did not feel like going that far, to Charmaine's disappointment. While she ate, she tried to think of ways of persuading Peter to go away, back to Montalbino. It was not that she utterly disliked him exactly, it was just annoying to share the house with him, and she knew as clearly as if Peter had told her that the next thing he was going to make her do was empty the things out of those laundry bags and wash them, too. The idea of more washing made her shudder. At least, she thought, I'm not going to be here tomorrow, so he can't make me do it then. All at once, she was hideously nervous. She was going to see the king. She'd been crazy to write to him, quite mad, and now she was going to have to go off and see him. Outside! Ew! Her appetite went away. She looked up from her last creamy scone and found it was now dark outside. The magical lighting had come indoors, filling the room with what seemed like golden sunshine, but the windows were black. "I'm going to bed," she said. "I've got a long day tomorrow." "Oh, if that king of yours has any sense," Peter said, "he'll kick you out straight as soon as he sees you. Then you can come back here and do the laundry." Since both of these things were exactly what Charmaine was afraid of, she did not answer. She simply picked up the Memoirs of an Exorcist for some light reading, marched to the door with it, and turned left to where the bedrooms were. So I have adult beverage, but I don't feel like reading that, or I don't feel like drinking that on YouTube. Wait, I clear the last. Give me 1 second. Whoa! Dad got out the puppy food with jerky for a buffer. Also, poor dear baby girl Opal has a boo, so she has to wear the cone of shame. But luckily, she also has Tweetos. She is my beautiful little girl, and I love her very much. No more. All gone. I love you. You're a good girl. You're a good girl, and I love you very much. It's almost bedtime. Almost, but not quite. I love you. Chapter 7, in which a number of people arrive at the royal mansion. Chapter 7, yeah. Charmaine had rather a disturbed night. Some of this was certainly due to the memoirs of... Did you sneeze so hard you slapped your cone on the floor? Oh, bedtime, Dad. It's bedtime. Well,
It's only 9:30. Oh, little bully. Oh.
Charmaine had a rather disturbed night. Some of this was certainly due to the memoirs of an exorcist, whose author had clearly been very busy among a lot of haunts and weirdities, all of which he described in a matter-of-fact way that left Charmaine in no doubt that the ghosts were entirely real and mostly very unpleasant. She spent a lot of the night shivering and wishing she knew how to turn on the light. Some of the disturbance was due to Waif, who was determined that she had a right to sleep on Charmaine's pillow.
Meaningful looks indeed.
On the other hand, she does deserve to sleep on Charmaine's pillow because she's a good girl. But most of the disturbance was nerves, pure and simple, and the fact that Charmaine had no way of telling what the time was. She kept waking up thinking, suppose I oversleep. She woke up in a gray dawn, hearing birds twittering somewhere, and almost decided to get up then. But somehow she fell asleep again, and when she woke next, it was in broad daylight. Help! She cried out and flung back the covers, accidentally flinging Waif onto the floor too, because she's evil. Jail mother for 1,000 years. And stumbled across the room to find the good clothes that she had put out specially. As she dragged on her best green skirt, the sensible thing to do came at last. Great Uncle William, she called out, how do I tell what time it is? Merely tap your left wrist and say, time. My dear, it struck Charmaine that the voice was fainter and weaker than it had been. She hoped it was simply that the spell was wearing off, and not that Great Uncle William himself was getting weaker, wherever he was. Time? She expected a voice, or more importantly a clock to appear. People in High Norland were great on clocks. Her own house had 17, including one in the bathroom. She had been vaguely surprised that Great Uncle William did not seem to have even one cuckoo clock somewhere, but she realized the reason for this what happened was that she simply knew the time. It was 8 o'clock. And it'll take me at least an hour to walk there, she gasped, ramming her arms into her best silk blouse as she ran for the bathroom. She was more nervous than ever, but she did her hair in there. Her reflection, with water trickling across it for some reason, looked terribly young with its hair and one rusty pigtail over its shoulder. You'll know I'm only a schoolgirl, she thought, but there was no time to dwell on it. Charmaine rushed out of the bathroom, back through the same door, leftward, and charged into the warm, tidy kitchen. There were now 5 laundry bags leaning beside the sink, but Charmaine had no time to bother about that. Waif scuttled towards her, whining piteously, and scuttled back to the fireplace where the fire was still cheerfully burning. Charmaine was just about to tap the mantelpiece and ask for breakfast when she saw Waif's problem. Waif was now too small to get her tail anywhere near that fireplace, so Charmaine tapped and said, "Dog food, please," before asking for breakfast for herself, because that's what heroes do, feed the dog first. As she sat at the cleared table, hurrying through her breakfast, while Waif briskly cleaned up the dog dish at her feet, Charmaine could not help but grudgingly think that it was much nicer having the kitchen clean and tidy. I suppose Peter has his uses, she thought, pouring herself a last cup of coffee. But then she felt that she ought to tap her wrist again, and she knew it was now 6 minutes to 9, and jumped up in a panic. How did I take so long? She said out loud, and raced back towards her bedroom for her smart jacket, as opposed to her stupid jacket. Perhaps because she was putting on the jacket as she ran, she somehow turned the wrong way through the door and found herself in a very peculiar place. It was a long, thin room with pipes running everywhere around it, and in the middle was a large, trickling tank mystifyingly covered in blue fur. Oh, bother, Charmaine said, and she backed out through the door. She found herself back in the kitchen. Well, at least I know the way back from there, she said, diving through into the living room and running for the front door. Outside, she nearly tripped over a crock of milk, which must have been meant for Rollo. And he doesn't even deserve it, she said, as she shut the door with a slam. Down the front path she raced between beheaded hydrangeas and out through the gate, which shut with a clash behind her. Then she managed to slow down because it was silly to try to run, however many miles it was to the royal mansion. But she went down the road at a very brisk walk indeed, and she just got to the first bend when the garden gate went clash behind her. Charmaine whirled round. Waif was running after her, pattering as fast as her little legs could take her. Charmaine sighed and marched back towards her. Seeing her coming, Waif gamboled delightedly and made tiny squeaks of pleasure. Oh, 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 Mother, I was stuck. No, Waif, Charmaine said. You can't come. Go home. She pointed sternly back towards Great Uncle William's house. Home! Waif drooped both ears and sat up and begged. No, Charmaine commanded. Go home! Waif dropped to the ground and became a miserable white lump, with just the tip of her tail wagging, hoping. Oh, honestly, Charmaine said, and since Waif seemed determined not to budge from the middle of the road, Charmaine was forced to pick her up and rush back to Great Uncle William's house with her. I can't take you with me, she explained breathlessly as she went. I've got to see the king, and people don't take dogs to see the king. She opened Great Uncle William's front gate and dumped Waif on the garden path. Heartlessly. There, now stay. She shut the gate on Waif's reproachful face and strode off down the road again, and as she went, she tapped her wrist anxiously and said, Time? But she was outside of Great Uncle William's grounds, and then the spell did not work. All Charmaine knew was that it was getting later, and she broke into a trot. Behind her, the gate clashed again, and Charmaine looked back to see Waif, the good girl, the loving, wonderful, saintly dog, was rushing after her, and she... Charmaine groaned, whirled around, raced to meet Waif, scooped her up, and dumped her back inside the gate. Now be a good dog and stay, she panted, running off again. And the gate clashed behind her, and Waif once more came pelting after her. Oh, I'll scream, Charmaine said. She turned back and dumped Waif inside of the gate for a third time. Stay there, you silly little dog! This time, she set off towards town at a run, and behind her, the gate clashed yet again, and tiny footsteps pattered in the road. Charmaine whirled round and ran back towards Waif, crying out, Oh, blast you, Waif, I shall be so late! This time she picked up Waif and carried her towards the town, panting out, all right, you win. I shall have to take you because I'll be late if I don't, but I don't want you. Waif, don't you understand? Waif, meanwhile, was delighted. She squirmed upward and licked Charmaine's chin. What a good girl I am. No, stop that, she said. I'm not pleased. I hate you. You're a real nuisance. Keep still or I'll drop you. Waif settled in Charmaine's arms with a sigh of contentment. Charmaine said as she hurried on. As she rounded the huge bulge of cliff, Charmaine had meant to check upwards in case the Lubbock came plunging down at her from the meadow above, but by then she was in such a hurry that she clean forgot about the Lubbock and simply jog-trotted onwards, and, greatly to her surprise, the town was almost in front of her when she came around the bend. She had not remembered that it was so near. There were houses and towers rosy and twinkling in the morning sun, only a stone's throw away. Only a stone's throw away from that family that died of mysterious rock-related injuries. I think Aunt Sempronia's pony made a meal of this journey, Charmaine thought. Let me read that without a tissue in front of me. I think Aunt Sempronia's pony made a meal of this journey, Charmaine thought, as she strode in among the first houses. The road dove across the river and became a dirty town street. Charmaine thought she remembered that this end of town was rather rough and unpleasant, and marched on fast and nervously, but, although most of the people she passed seemed quite poor, none of them seemed to notice Charmaine particularly. Or if they did, they only noticed Waif, peeping out enthusiastically from Charmaine's arms. Pretty little dog, remarked a woman carrying strings of onions to market as Charmaine strode by, and she was very right. Because Waif is very pretty and very wonderful and sweet and loving, with a bottomless stomach, regardless of her size. Pretty little monster, Charmaine said. The woman looked very surprised. Waif squirmed protestingly. Yes, you are, Charmaine told her as they began to come among wider streets and smarter houses. You are a bully and a blackmailer. And if you've made me late, I shall never forgive you. The first two are true. The third, I will always forgive you, my beloved little dog. As they reached the marketplace, the big clock on the town hall struck 10 o'clock, and Charmaine went suddenly from needing to hurry to wondering how she was going to stretch 10 minutes' walk into half an hour. The royal mansion was practically just around the corner from here. Well, at least she could cool down and get cool. Or she could slow down and get cool. By now the sun had burned through the mist of the mountains, and what with that and Waif's warm body, Charmaine was decidedly hot. She took a detour along the esplanade that ran high above the river, rushing swift and brown on its way to the great valley beyond the town, and dropped to a saunter. 3 of her favorite bookshops were on this road. She pushed her way among other sauntering people and looked eagerly into windows. Nice little dog, several people said as she went. Charmaine said to Waif. Fetlock, they know.
You're a good girl. I love you very much, even when you steal my hamburger.
She arrived in Royal Square as the big clock there began to chime the half-hour. Charmaine was pleased, but as she crossed the square to the booming of the clock, she was somehow not pleased and not hot anymore either. She was cold and small and insignificant. She knew that she had been stupid to come. She was a fool. They would take one look at her and send her away. The flashing of the golden tiles on the roof of the royal mansion daunted her completely. She was glad of Waif's small, warm tongue licking her on the chin again. By the time she was climbing the steps to the heavy front door of the mansion, she was so nervous that she almost turned around and ran away.
I know. Puppies make everything better, don't they, baby?
But she told herself firmly that this was the one thing in the world that she really wanted to do, even though I'm not sure I do want to now, she thought. And everyone knows that those tiles are only tin enchanted to look like gold, she added, and she lifted the great gold-painted knocker and bravely hammered on the door with it. Then her knees threatened to fold under her, and she wondered if she could run away. She stood there quivering and clutching Waif hard. The door was opened by an old serving man, probably the butler, Charmaine thought, wondering where she had seen the old man before. Must have passed him in town on my way to school, she thought. She said, I'm Charmaine Baker. The king wrote me a letter. She let go of Waif with one hand in order to fetch the letter out of her pocket, but before she could get at it, the old butler held the door wide open. Please do come in, Miss Charming, he said in a quavery old voice. His Majesty is expecting you. Charmaine found herself entering the royal mansion on legs that wobbled almost as badly as the old butler's did. He was so stooped with age that his face was on level with Waif as Charmaine wobbled past him. He stopped her with a shaky old hand. Please to keep a tight hold on the little dog, miss. I wouldn't do to have it wandering about here. Charmaine discovered herself to be babbling. I do hope it's all right to bring her. She would keep following me, you see, and in the end I had to pick her up and carry her here, or I'd have been... Oh, it's perfectly all right, miss, the butler said, heaving the great door shut. His Majesty is very fond of dogs, because, you see, he is a kind and loving, wonderful king, a hero of a different story, as it were. Indeed, he has been bitten several times trying to make friends with... Well, the fact of the matter is, miss, that our Rajputi cook owns a dog that is not at all a nice creature. It has been known to slay other dogs when they impinge upon its territory. Oh dear, Charmaine said weakly. Precisely, said the butler. If you will follow me, miss. Also, I would love to... Well, let's see if I can do it. There. So we can pretend that this is Waif. Also,
A friend of mine crocheted me a Navi, and he's so cute.
Precisely, said the old butler. If you will follow me, miss. Waif squirmed in Charmaine's arms because Charmaine was clutching her so tightly as she followed the butler along the broad stone corridor. It was cold inside the mansion and rather dark. Charmaine was surprised to find that there were no ornaments anywhere and almost no hint of royal grandeur unless you counted 1 or 2 large brown pictures in dingy gold frames. There were big pale squares on the walls every so often, where pictures had been taken away, but Charmaine was by now so nervous that she did not wonder about this. She just became colder and thinner and more unimportant, until she felt that she must be about the size of Waif. The butler stopped and creakily pushed open a mighty square oak door. "Your Majesty, Miss Charming Baker," he announced. "And a dog." Then he doddered away. Charmaine managed to dodder into the room. The shakiness must be catching, she thought, and did not dare curtsy in case her knees collapsed. The room was a vast library. Dim brown shelves of books stretched away in both directions. The smell of old book, which Charmaine normally loved, was almost overpowering. Straight in front of her was a great oak table piled high with more books and stacks of old yellow papers, and some newer, whiter paper at the near end. There were 3 big carved chairs at that end, arranged around a very small charcoal fire in an iron basket. The basket sat on a kind of iron tray, which in turn sat on an almost worn-out carpet. 2 old people sat in 2 of the carved chairs. One was a big old man with a nicely trimmed white beard, and then, when Charmaine dared to look at him, kindly, crinkled old blue eyes. She knew he had to be the king. "Oh, come here, my dear," he said to her, "and take a seat. Put the little dog down near the fire." Charmaine managed to do as the king said. Waif, to her relief, seemed to realize that one must be on one's best behavior here. She sat gravely down on the carpet and politely quivered her tail. Charmaine sat on the edge of the carved chair and quivered all over. "Well, let my daughter known to you," said the king. "Princess Hilda." Be quiet. Princess Hilda was old, too. If Charmaine had not known that she was the king's daughter, she might have thought the princess and the king were the same age. The main difference between them was that the princess looked twice as royal as the king. She was a big lady like her father, with very neat iron-gray hair, and a tweed suit so plain and tweed-colored that Charmaine knew that it was a highly aristocratic suit. Her only ornament was a big ring on one veiny old hand. "That is a very sweet little dog," she said in a firm and forthright voice. "What is her name?" "Waif, your highness," Charmaine faltered. "And have you had her for long?" the princess asked. Charmaine could tell that the princess was making conversation in order to set her at ease, and that made her more nervous than ever. No, it is... The fact is that she was a stray, or Great Uncle William said that she was, and he can't have had her long because he didn't know that he was... a girl, William Norland, the wizard." The king and princess both said, "Oh!" at this, and the king said, "Are you related to Wizard Norland then, my dear?" "Our great friend," added the princess. He's my Aunt Sempronia's great uncle, really," Charmaine confessed. Somehow, the atmosphere became much more friendly. The king said rather longingly, "I suppose you've had no news of how the Wizard Norland is yet?" Charmaine shook her head. "I'm afraid not, your majesty, but he did look awfully ill when the elves took him away." "Not to be wondered at," stated Princess Hilda. "Poor William." "Now, Miss Baker." "Oh, please, call me Charmaine," Charmaine stammered. "Very well," the princess agreed. "But we must get down to business now, child, because I shall have to leave you soon to attend to my first guest. "My daughter is sparing you an hour or so," the king said, "to explain to you what we do here in the library and how you may best assist us. This is because we gathered from your handwriting that you were not very old, which we see as the case, and so probably inexperienced." He gave Charmaine the most enchanting smile. "We really are most grateful to you for your offer of help, my dear. No one has ever considered that we might be in need of assistance here." Charmaine felt her face filling with heat. She knew that she was blushing horribly. "My pleasure, she managed to mutter. "Pull your chair over to the table," Princess Hilda interrupted, "and we'll get to work." As Charmaine got up and dragged the heavy chair over, the king said courteously, "We hope you may not be too hot in here with the brazier beside you. It may be summer now, but we old people, we feel the cold these days." Charmaine was still frozen with nerves. Not at all, sire, she said. And Waif, at least, is happy, the king said, pointing a gnarly finger. Waif had rolled onto her back with all four paws in the air and was basking in the heat from the brazier. She seemed far happier than Charmaine was. To work, father, the princess said severely. She fetched up the glasses hanging from a chain round her neck and planted them on her aristocratic nose. The king fetched up a pair of pince-nez. Charmaine fetched up her own glasses. If she had not been so nervous, she would have wanted to giggle at the way that they all had to do this. Now, said the princess, we have in this library books, papers, and parchment scrolls. After a lifetime of labor, Father and I have managed to list roughly half of the books by name and author's name, and assigned each a number, together with a brief account of what is in each book. Father will continue in doing this while you make yourself responsible for my main task, which is to catalog papers and scrolls. I have barely made a start here, I'm afraid. Here is my list. She opened a large folder full of sheets of paper, covered in elegant spidery writing, and spread a row of them in front of Charmaine. As you see, I have several main headings: family letters, household accounts, historic writings, and so on. Your task is to go through each pile of paper and decide exactly what each sheet contains. You then write a description of it under the appropriate heading, after which you put the paper carefully in one of these labeled boxes here. Is that clear so far? Charmaine, leaning forward to look at the beautifully written list, was afraid that she seemed awfully stupid. What do I do if I find a paper that doesn't fit into any of your headings, madam? A very good question, Princess Hilda asked. We are hoping that you will find a great many things that do not fit. When you do find one, consult my father at once in case the paper is important. If it isn't, put it in the box marked miscellaneous. Now here is your first packet of papers. I'll watch as you go through them to see how you go on. There are papers for your lists. Pen and ink are there. Please start. She pushed a frayed brown packet of letters tied together with pink tape in front of Charmaine and sat back to watch. I've never known anything so off-putting, Charmaine thought. She tremulously unpicked the pink knot and tried spreading the letters out on the table. Pick each one by its opposite corners, Princess Hilda said. Don't push them. Oh dear, Charmaine thought. She glanced sideways at the king, who had taken up a wilted-looking soft leather book and was leafing carefully through it. I'd hoped to be doing that, she thought. She sighed and carefully opened the first crumbly brown letter. My dearest, gorgeous, and wonderful darling, she read. I miss you hideously. She said to Princess Hilda. Is there a special box for love letters? Yes, indeed, said the princess. This one. Please record the date and the name of the person who wrote it. Who was it, by the way? Charmaine looked on the end of the letter. It says Big Dolphy. Both the king and the princess said, Well! And the king laughed most heartily. Then they're from my father to my mother, Princess Hilda said. My mother died many years ago now, but never mind that. Write it on your list. Charmaine looked at the crumbly brown state of the paper and thought it must have been many years ago. She was surprised that the king did not seem to mind her reading it, but neither he nor the princess seemed in the least bit worried. Perhaps royal people are different, she thought, looking at the next letter. Dearest Chuffy Puffy one. Oh well. She got on with her task. After a while, the princess stood and pushed her chair neatly up to the table. This seems quite satisfactory, she stated. I must go. The guest will be arriving soon. I still wish I had been able to ask that husband of hers too, father. Out of the question, my dear, the king said, without looking up from the notes he was making. Poaching. He's someone else's royal wizard. Oh, I know, Princess Hilda said, but I am also aware that Ingrid has 2 royal wizards, and poor William is ill and may be dying. Life is never fair, my dear, the king said, still scratching away with his quill pen. Besides, William had no more success than we have had. I am aware of that too, father, Princess Hilda said as she left the library. The door shut with a heavy thud behind her. Charmaine bent over the next pile of papers, trying to look as if she had not been listening. It seemed private. This pile of paper had been tied into a bundle for so long that each sheet had stuck to the next one, all dry and brownish, like wasps' nests that Charmaine had once found in the attic at home. She became very busy trying to separate the letters. Said the king. Charmaine looked up to see that he was smiling at her, with his quill in the air, and a sideways twinkle at her from above his glasses. I see that you are a very discreet young lady, he said, and now must have gathered from our talk just now that we, and your great uncle with us, are searching for some very important things. My daughter's headings will give you some clue of what to look for. Your keywords will be treasury, revenues, gold, and elf gift. If you find a mention of any of these, my dear, please tell me at once. The idea of looking for such important things made Charmaine's fingers on the paper go all cold and clumsy. Yes, of course, your Majesty, she said. Rather to her relief, the packet of papers was nothing but a list of goods and their prices, all of which seemed to be surprisingly low. To 10 pounds of wax candles at 2 pennies a pound, 20 pence, she read. Well, it did seem to date from 200 years ago. To 6 ounces of finest saffron, 30 pence. To 9 logs of fragrant applewood for the scenting of the chief's chambers, 1 farthing, and so on. The next page was full of things like 2 40 ells of linen drapes, 44 shillings. Charmaine made careful notes, but put those pages in the box labeled household accounts and peeled up to the next sheet. Oh, she said. The next sheet read, to Wizard Mellicott for the enchanting of 100 square feet of tin tilings to give the appearance of golden roofs, 200 guineas. What is it, my dear? The king asked, putting his finger in his place on his place in his book. Charmaine read the ancient bill out to him. He chuckled and shook his head a little. So it definitely was done by magic, is it? He said. I must confess I'd always hoped it would turn out to be real gold, hadn't you? Well, yes, it looks like gold anyway, Charmaine said consolingly. A very good spell, too, to last 200 years, the king said, nodding. Expensive as well. 200 guineas was a lot of money in those days. Ah, well, I never did hope to solve our financial problems that way. Besides, it would look shocking if we climbed up and stripped all the tiles off the roof. Keep looking, my dear. Charmaine kept looking, but all she found was someone charging 2 guineas to plant a rose garden, and someone else getting paid 10 guineas to refurbish the treasury. No, not someone else. The same Wizard Mellicott, who did the roof. Mellicott was a specialist, I fancy, the king said, when Charmaine had read this one out. Looks to me like a fellow who went in for faking precious metals. The treasury was certainly empty by that date. I've known my crown was fake for years. Must be Mellicott's work. Are you getting peckish all, my dear? A bit cold and stiff? We don't bother with regular lunch. My daughter and I don't hold with it. But I regularly ask the butler to bring in a snack around this time. Why not get up and stretch your legs while I ring the bell? So, I think that nearly an hour is a good time to stop, because when I looked at the index, I had another 15 pages, which I need to get some sleep. I had challenging couple of days. So, get some rest and do your best to become somebody that you can be proud of. And if people can hate without knowing a thing about you, then I can love you for exactly the same reason. I love you very much. Get some sleep.